I'm Sofia, and at 32 years old, I've learned that sometimes the people who doubt you the most end up being your greatest motivation. What started as a love story with David Morrison became a nightmare when his wealthy family decided I was nothing more than a gold digger trying to steal their precious son's inheritance. They had no idea that their cruelty would ignite something in me that would eventually make me wealthier than all of them combined. Before I dive into how I went from being called a trashy opportunist to building a multi-million-dollar empire, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about overcoming toxic family dynamics and building success from nothing. Trust me, this journey gets wild. Growing up in East Cleveland, luxury was having heat that worked all winter and groceries that lasted until the next paycheck. My mother, Carmen, worked double shifts as a hospital custodian while studying for her nursing degree at night. My father had left when I was 7, deciding that responsibility wasn't for him. Mom never remarried, pouring all her energy into making sure I understood that education was my ticket out of poverty. Mija, you're smart, she'd tell me while reviewing my homework after her 14-hour shifts. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of better things. Those words would echo in my mind years later when I needed them most. I earned a scholarship to Ohio State University, where I studied business and marketing, while my classmates worried about which sorority to join or where to spring break. I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover expenses my scholarship didn't touch. Weekends meant tutoring wealthy kids whose parents paid me more for 2 hours of help than I made in a week at the campus bookstore. It was during my senior year that I met David Morrison. He was completing his MBA while I finished my undergraduate degree, and we were both in the same advanced marketing seminar. David was everything I wasn't: confident, effortlessly charming, and blissfully unaware of how easy his life had been. His family owned Morrison Industries, a manufacturing company that had been passed down through 3 generations. Our first conversation happened after class when he asked if I wanted to grab coffee to discuss our group project. "I've been watching you in class," he said with that easy smile that would later complicate my life. "You always have the best insights. I think we'd make a good team." David was handsome in that polished, prep school way: perfectly styled blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a wardrobe that cost more than my mother's monthly salary. But what drew me to him wasn't his looks or his obvious wealth. It was how he listened when I spoke, how he genuinely seemed interested in my ideas, and how he never made me feel less than because of my background. Our coffee date turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks around campus. Within a month, we were inseparable. David was fascinated by my work ethic and my perspective on things he'd never had to consider. I was drawn to his optimism and his genuine belief that hard work and good intentions could solve any problem. "You're different from the girls I usually date," he told me one evening as we studied together in the library. "You're real. You don't try to be someone else to impress people." If only I'd known then how much his family would hate me for being exactly who I was. The first time David invited me home for dinner, I spent 3 days agonizing over what to wear. I'd never been inside a house that wasn't in my working class neighborhood, and I had no idea what to expect. David had been deliberately vague about his family's wealth, mentioning only that his father ran a successful business. The Morrison estate sat on 15 acres in the most exclusive part of Columbus. The circular driveway could have held 20 cars, and the house itself looked like something from a magazine. As we pulled up in David's BMW, a graduation gift from his parents, my stomach churned with anxiety. "Relax," David said, squeezing my hand. "They're going to love you." The front door opened before we could knock, revealing a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled auburn hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Margaret Morrison was elegant in that effortless way that comes from generations of wealth. Understated jewelry, expensive clothes that fit perfectly, and the kind of posture that screamed good breeding. "David, darling," she said, embracing her son before turning her attention to me. Her eyes swept over my carefully chosen outfit, a conservative dress from Target that I'd bought specifically for this occasion, and I watched her smile tighten almost imperceptibly. "Mom, this is Sofia," David said proudly. "Sofia, my mother, Margaret. It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Morrison, I said, extending my hand. She shook it briefly, her grip limp and dismissive. Yes. Well, come in. Your father is waiting in the living room. The house was even more intimidating inside than out. Crystal chandeliers, oil paintings that looked like they belonged in museums, and furniture that probably cost more than my mother's car. David's father, Charles Morrison, was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of making million-dollar decisions. So you're the young lady David's been telling us about, he said, his handshake firm but his eyes calculating. What did you say your father does? The question hit like a slap. David had warned me his parents might ask about my background, but I hadn't expected it to happen within the first 5 minutes. My father isn't in the picture, I replied honestly. My mother works in healthcare. I could see Margaret and Charles exchange a look, a quick, almost imperceptible communication that somehow conveyed volumes. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and subtle interrogation. They asked about my major, my career plans, my family's history. Each question felt designed to highlight the differences between David's world and mine. How interesting that you're paying your own way through school, Margaret commented over dessert. David has always been so fortunate to have his education provided for. I'm proud of my scholarship, I replied, though I could feel heat rising in my cheeks. Hard work pays off. Oh, I'm sure it does, she said with a smile that could have cut glass. The drive back to campus was tense. David kept glancing at me, clearly sensing my discomfort but not understanding its source. That went well, he said finally. They seemed to like you. I stared out the window, processing the evening's subtle hostilities. David, I don't think your parents approve of me. What? That's ridiculous. They're always cautious with new people. Give them time. But time would only make things worse over the next 6 months. As David and I grew closer, his family's disapproval became increasingly obvious. At family gatherings, I was seated at the children's table despite being older than David's cousin, Jessica, who had married into money and was treated like royalty. Margaret would make comments about my clothes, my makeup, my accent, all delivered with a smile and couched as friendly advice. Sophia, dear, have you considered a different shade of lipstick? That red is so bold for someone with your complexion. David tells us you're looking for jobs in marketing. How ambitious. Though I suppose with your background, you'll need to work. The worst part was watching David navigate these interactions. He genuinely didn't see the cruelty in his mother's words, interpreting her passive-aggressive comments as genuine concern. When I tried to explain how his family made me feel, he'd dismiss my concerns. You're being too sensitive, he'd say. Mom's just particular about things. She means well. After we graduated, I landed a position at a mid-sized marketing firm in Columbus, determined to prove myself professionally. David joined his father's company, sliding into a vice president role that came with a 6-figure salary and minimal responsibility. The disparity in our situations became a constant source of tension, not just between us, but within his family's perception of our relationship. Isn't it convenient that Sophia found a job right here in Columbus? I overheard Margaret saying to her sister at David's birthday party, right where David happens to be inheriting a fortune. The comment stung because there was a grain of truth to it. I had chosen to stay in Columbus partially because of David, but I'd also turned down opportunities in Chicago and New York because I believed we were building something real together. His family's insinuation that I was strategically positioning myself for financial gain was both hurtful and infuriating. 2 years after graduation, David proposed. It should have been the happiest moment of my life, but the engagement only escalated. His family's campaign against me. Margaret insisted on hosting an engagement party at their country club, an event that felt more like a trial than a celebration. We need to discuss the prenup, Charles announced during what was supposed to be a casual family dinner a week before the party. Our lawyers have drawn up something comprehensive, Dad, David said uncomfortably. I don't think this is negotiable, Charles interrupted. The Morrison family has worked too hard to build our wealth to see it disappear because of a mistake, The prenup was 30 pages of legal language that essentially ensured I would leave the marriage with nothing more than I'd brought into it. No claim to David's inheritance, no stake in Morrison Industries, no alimony regardless of the circumstances of our divorce. It's just a formality, David said later as we reviewed the document. We're never going to get divorced anyway. But I understood what the prenup really represented: his family's absolute certainty that I was using him for money. It was their insurance policy against my supposed gold-digging schemes. I signed it, not because I agreed with their assessment of my character, but because I loved David and believed our relationship was worth more than their money. That decision would later prove to be both the most humiliating and the most liberating moment of my life. The engagement party was a disaster. Margaret had invited 200 of Columbus's elite, introducing me to everyone as David's little girlfriend from the wrong side of town. She'd chosen my dress, a conservative navy blue number that made me look like a church secretary, and seated me at a table with David's elderly great aunts while he mingled with his business contacts. "So you're the one who's marrying our David," said Aunt Millicent, a woman in her 80s with more jewelry than a department store display. "How did you two meet?" Before I could answer, Margaret appeared at my elbow. "They met at school." Sophia was very determined to catch David's attention. The implication was clear, and the conversation around the table shifted uncomfortably. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I found Margaret's sister Patricia touching up her makeup. "You know, dear," Patricia said without looking at me, "David's had many girlfriends over the years. Pretty girls, accomplished girls, but they all understood that Morrisons marry within their circle. David and I love each other," I said quietly. Patricia finally turned to face me, her expression pitying. "Love is wonderful, but it doesn't pay for the lifestyle you're hoping to maintain. You might want to consider whether you're really doing David any favors by staying with him." I left the party early, claiming a headache. David followed me home, concerned and confused by my withdrawal from the evening's festivities. "Did something happen?" he asked as I changed out of the dress I'd grown to hate. "Your family thinks I'm a gold digger," I said bluntly. "They think I'm using you for money." David was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you think?" "That I believe that. I think you want to believe the best of everyone," I replied. "But David, your family is never going to accept me. The question is whether you're willing to choose them or me." It was an ultimatum I hadn't meant to deliver, but once the words were out, I realized they represented exactly how I felt. 2 years of subtle insults and passive-aggressive comments had worn me down. I needed to know where I stood. "You're the woman I want to marry," David said firmly. "My family will come around. They just need time to see what I see in you." But time was something we wouldn't have. The wedding planning process was a special kind of torture. Margaret took control of every detail, making choices that reflected her taste rather than mine and constantly reminding me how much everything cost. "The flowers alone are $15,000, she'd mention casually. "Of course, the Morrisons have always believed in doing things properly." My mother, who had saved for months to afford a modest mother of the bride dress, was clearly uncomfortable with the scale of the wedding. "Mija," she said one evening as we looked at the guest list, "are you sure this is what you want? This family, they don't respect you." "I love David," I replied, but my voice lacked conviction. "Love should make you feel valued, not diminished," she said gently. "Don't lose yourself trying to fit into someone else's world." 3 weeks before the wedding, everything fell apart. I was working late at my marketing firm, preparing for a major campaign launch, when David called. His voice was strained, distant. "We need to talk," he said. "Can you come over?" I found him in his apartment, sitting on the couch with a glass of whiskey and an expression I'd never seen before. On the coffee table was a manila folder containing photographs and documents. "What's this?" I asked, though something in my stomach had already begun to twist with dread. "My father hired a private investigator," David said without looking at me. "He wanted to be sure about your background before the wedding. The photographs showed me leaving work, having lunch with colleagues, visiting my mother. Nothing scandalous or incriminating, but the violation of privacy was staggering. The documents contained information about my family's financial history, my student loans, even details about my father's abandonment that I'd shared with David in confidence. They investigated me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There's more, David said, his voice hollow. He handed me a report that detailed my job performance, my salary, and a projection of my lifetime earnings. The final page contained a psychological profile that labeled me as financially motivated and strategically calculating in relationship choices. David, this is insane, I said, sinking into a chair. They hired professionals to prove I'm a gold digger? The report suggests that your career choices and relationship timeline indicate opportunistic behavior, he recited, sounding like he was reading from a script. Do you believe that? I asked, looking directly at him. After 2 years together, do you believe I'm using you for money? The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. When David finally spoke, his words shattered what was left of my heart. I don't know what to believe anymore, he said. The timeline does seem convenient. You chose to stay in Columbus. You took a job that would position you in our social circle. You were very understanding about the prenup. Because I loved you, I shouted, my composure finally breaking. Because I thought what we had was real. Maybe it was, David said sadly, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe you convinced yourself you loved me because it was easier than admitting the truth. I stared at this man I'd planned to marry, searching for any sign of the person who had once defended me to his family, who had told me I was different from other girls, who had promised we could build a life together despite our different backgrounds. You're calling off the wedding, I said. It wasn't a question. I think it's for the best, he replied. For both of us. I left his apartment that night and never spoke to him again. The next morning, I called the venue, the caterer, the florist, and every other vendor Margaret had hired, explaining that the wedding was cancelled. The humiliation was overwhelming, not just the personal rejection, but the public nature of it. Columbus's elite social circle was small, and word traveled fast. My mother held me while I cried for 3 days straight. When I finally stopped, she sat me down at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a look of fierce determination. Mija, you have 2 choices, she said. You can let this destroy you, or you can use it to fuel something better. Show them who you really are. 3 months after the cancelled wedding, I quit my job at the marketing firm and started my own company. With $5,000 in savings and a credit card that I prayed would cover my first month's expenses, I launched Rodriguez Marketing Solutions from my mother's dining room table. The decision to start my own business wasn't just about professional ambition, it was about proving to myself and everyone else that I wasn't the opportunistic gold digger the Morrisons believed me to be. If they thought I was financially motivated, I'd show them what real financial success looked like when it was earned rather than inherited. My first client was a small restaurant in my old neighborhood that needed help with social media marketing. The owner, Maria, paid me $300 to create a month's worth of Facebook and Instagram content. It wasn't much, but it was a start. You're really good at this, Maria said after I'd helped her increase her weekend reservations by 40%. My cousin owns a bakery downtown. She could use someone like you. Word spread through Cleveland's Latino business community, and within 6 months, I had 12 clients. I was working 18-hour days, learning web design, social media strategy, and digital advertising through online courses and trial and error. My mother's dining room table was covered with client files, marketing materials, and the laptop I'd bought with my last paycheck from the marketing firm. The work was exhausting, but exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that belonged entirely to me. No one could dismiss my success as opportunistic or unearned when I was creating it from nothing. A year after starting Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, I landed my first major client, a mid-sized manufacturing company that needed a complete digital transformation. The contract was worth $50,000, more money than I'd ever seen at once. But more importantly, it validated my belief that I could compete with established agencies. How did you learn to do all this? Asked the company's CEO as I presented my comprehensive marketing strategy. Your background is impressive for someone working alone, I had excellent motivation to succeed, I replied with a smile. By my second year in business, I had hired 3 employees and moved into a proper office space. My client base had expanded beyond Cleveland to include businesses in Columbus, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now serving clients in the same city where David and his family had dismissed me as a money-grabbing opportunist. I occasionally heard updates about the Morrisons through mutual acquaintances. David had married Priscilla Wellington, a banker's daughter whose family had money going back for generations. Margaret had gotten her perfect daughter-in-law, and Charles had his business succession secured. They'd all moved on from the Sofia chapter of their lives, but Sofia was just getting started. The breakthrough came in my third year when I identified a gap in the market that established agencies were ignoring. Small and medium-sized businesses needed sophisticated digital marketing strategies, but they couldn't afford the rates charged by major agencies. I developed a scalable service model that could deliver enterprise-level results at prices these businesses could manage. The concept was simple. Instead of charging premium rates for custom work, I created standardized packages that could be efficiently delivered while still producing measurable results. It was like the McDonald's of marketing: consistent quality, affordable pricing, and systematic delivery that could be replicated across multiple markets. Within 6 months of launching the new service model, Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had expanded to 4 cities and employed 23 people. The revenue growth was staggering, from $50,000 in year 1 to over $2 million in year 4. I moved into a downtown Cleveland office building, hired a CFO to manage the company's financial growth, and started receiving invitations to speak at marketing conferences. The girl who had once been dismissed as too ambitious for her own good was now being recognized as an innovative entrepreneur who had identified and solved a real market need, but the real vindication was still to come. 5 years after the canceled wedding, I received a call that would change everything. A venture capital firm in New York had been tracking my company's growth and wanted to discuss an investment opportunity. "We've been watching Rodriguez Marketing Solutions for 2 years," said Jennifer Walsh, the managing partner who flew to Cleveland to meet me. "Your business model is exactly what the market needs, and your execution has been flawless. We'd like to offer you $15 million for a 30% stake in your company." I stared at her across the conference table in my office, trying to process what she just said. $15 million for a company I'd started with $5,000 and a dining room table. "That would value my company at $50 million, I said slowly. $50 million is our conservative estimate," Jennifer replied. "With our investment and connections, we project Rodriguez Marketing Solutions could be worth over $200 million within 5 years. The partnership with the venture capital firm accelerated everything. Within 18 months, we had offices in 12 cities and over 300 employees. The standardized service model that I'd developed was being franchised to marketing professionals across the country, creating a network of Rodriguez Marketing Solutions affiliates. 2 years after the VC investment, we went public. The IPO raised over $200 million, and my personal stake in the company was valued at $120 million. At 31 years old, I was worth more money than the Morrison family's 3-generation fortune. The local business journal ran a cover story about my success, detailing the company's growth from a one-woman operation to a publicly traded corporation. The article mentioned my background, including my education at Ohio State and the early years of building the business in Cleveland. 3 days after the article was published, I received a call from David. "Sofia, it's David Morrison," he said, his voice uncertain. "I saw the article in the journal. Congratulations on your success." I hadn't spoken to him in 7 years, but hearing his voice brought back a flood of memories, some good, most painful. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How are you, David?" "I'm well. Married now, actually. We have 2 kids." He paused. "I wanted to call because I owe you an apology. The way things ended between us, the way my family treated you, it wasn't right." "No, it wasn't," I agreed, but it turned out to be exactly what I needed. There was a long silence. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I'd like to apologize properly, and I think there are things I need to say. We met at a cafe downtown, in the heart of the business district where my company's headquarters now occupied 3 floors of a glass tower. David looked older, more tired than I remembered. The easy confidence of his youth had been replaced by something more subdued. You look amazing, he said as we sat down. Success suits you. Thank you. You look well too. It wasn't entirely true. He looked like a man carrying the weight of choices he couldn't undo. I've thought about our conversation that night a lot over the years, he began. About the investigation, the accusations, the way I handled everything. I was wrong, Sofia. Not just wrong, cruel. Your family was convinced I was using you. I said, maybe you were too. Deep down, David shook his head. I was scared. Scared of disappointing them. Scared of making the wrong choice. Scared of standing up for what I knew was right. You deserved better from me. Yes, I did, I replied simply. But David, in a strange way, I'm grateful for how things ended. If you hadn't called off the wedding, I never would have started my own company. I never would have discovered what I was capable of. Do you think? He hesitated. Do you think things could have been different if I'd chosen differently? I considered the question seriously. Maybe, but probably not sustainably. Your family's attitude toward me wasn't going to change, and that would have poisoned our marriage. Eventually, this way, we both got to become who we were meant to be. As we parted ways that afternoon, David said something that stayed with me. I hope you know that you proved them all wrong. Not just about being a gold digger, but about everything. You're extraordinary, Sofia. You always were. The vindication was sweet, but it wasn't the most important thing that happened that year. 6 months after going public, I established the Rodriguez Foundation, a nonprofit organization focused on providing educational scholarships and business development resources for first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds. The foundation's mission statement read, "Every person deserves the opportunity to define their own worth, regardless of their background or circumstances." The first scholarship recipient was Maria Elena Santos, a young woman from East Cleveland whose story reminded me of my own. She was studying business at Ohio State, working 3 jobs to cover expenses, and dreaming of starting her own marketing agency. I want to help people like us, she told me during her scholarship interview. People who get told they're not good enough or smart enough or connected enough to succeed. Then you will, I replied, thinking of my mother's words about having the power to choose who we become. At the Foundation's first annual gala, I gave a speech to an audience that included some of Columbus's most prominent business leaders and philanthropists. As I looked out at the crowd, I spotted a familiar face in the back, Margaret Morrison, looking uncomfortable but present. After my speech, she approached me tentatively. Sofia, that was a beautiful presentation, she said. What you've built, what you're doing for these young people, it's remarkable. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison, I replied politely. I wanted to apologize. She continued, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. For how we treated you, for the things we said and believed. We were wrong about you. You were protecting your family the way you thought best, I said. I understand that now. Still, she said, I'm sorry, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished. David was lucky to have you. Even if we were too blind to see it at the time, it was the apology I'd never expected to receive and no longer needed. The woman who had once made me feel worthless with her subtle cruelty was now acknowledging my success and worth. But her validation didn't matter anymore. I had found my own. Today, Rodriguez Marketing Solutions employs over 2,000 people across 47 cities. The company's annual revenue exceeds $500 million, and my personal net worth has grown to over $300 million. I've been featured on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Entrepreneur magazines. Last year, I was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum about entrepreneurship and economic empowerment, but the numbers aren't what matter most to me. What matters is the letter I received from Maria Elena Santos 5 years after she graduated from Ohio State. She'd started her own digital marketing agency and just landed her first $1 million client. Miss Rodriguez, she wrote, I wanted you to know that your scholarship didn't just pay for my education, it taught me that my background doesn't determine my future. Thank you for showing me what's possible when someone believes in you, even when that someone is yourself. What matters is my mother's face when she saw the key to the house I bought her in the same neighborhood where she'd raised me, a beautiful home where she could retire comfortably and with dignity. What matters is the message I received last month from a young woman in Phoenix who used the foundation's business development resources to launch a food truck that's now expanding into 3 locations. The Morrisons thought I was a gold digger, and they weren't entirely wrong. I was digging for gold, just not theirs. I was digging for the treasure buried within myself. The potential that had been dismissed and underestimated by people who confused wealth with worth. Their rejection forced me to discover my own value, to build my own empire, to prove that success earned is infinitely more satisfying than success inherited. David remarried into the right family. His children will inherit Morrison Industries and continue the family legacy of wealth and privilege. And that's exactly how it should be for them. As for me, I've built something different, something that started with $5,000, a dining room table, and an unshakable belief that I deserved better than what I was being offered. I've learned that sometimes the people who see you as not good enough are actually preparing you to become better than they ever imagined. Sometimes being rejected by one family gives you the opportunity to create something for thousands of families, and sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's success so undeniable that the people who doubted you have no choice but to recognize your worth. Today, I'm richer than the Morrisons ever were. Not just in money, but in purpose, in impact, in the knowledge that everything I've built came from my own hands and my own heart. The girl they called a gold digger became a woman who mines opportunities, refines potential, and shares the wealth she creates with others who were told they weren't enough. That's the kind of rich I'm proud to be. Have you ever been underestimated because of your background or circumstances? Have you turned rejection into motivation? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you've proven your doubters wrong. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Sometimes the people who can't see your worth are the ones pushing you toward your destiny. Remember, your value isn't determined by who accepts you, it's determined by what you build when they don't.